The auteur theory is the recognition of the director's style and how the message is conveyed in the film. This theory accepts that cinematically successful films can create a personal stamp for that certain director that represents the style, camera placement, and cinematography. This includes techniques such as the character arc, reoccurring themes, lighting, and shot types. They have an extremely distinct style that reflects their certain creative vision. For example, you can easily set apart an Alfred Hitchcock film, especially because he uses a certain genre within his films, most of them being within the thriller or horror genre. Film noir was also used in most of his films, with the psychological impact of his characters being the basis for most of his work. The origin of the theory came from Truffaut and the members of the Cahiers, who recognised that the director brings the film to life and is the author of the film, which is where the name auteur originated from. Truffaut's theory maintains that a good director uses such a distinctive style or upholds such a regular theme, it is almost impossible to not recognise the director's work. A director that I believe is an auteur is Wes Anderson, who has been the brains behind films such as The Grand Budapest Hotel, Moonrise Kingdom, and Rushmore. One of Anderson's main techniques that sets his films apart from the rest is the vibrant and colourful cinematography that is always carefully matched with the costume and setting. He pairs this with symmetrical shots that almost represent a real-life painting or a picture. This, with the richly coloured colour grading and exquisite set design, gives Anderson an individuality that gives him his own personal edge as a director. His technical style also includes fast-paced camera moves, stop-motion, snap zooms, and slow-motion walking shots. Anderson mainly directs fast-paced comedies that have sad and melancholy elements intertwined into the storyline, with themes such as grief, loss of innocence, sibling rivalry, and unlikely friendships. In Moonrise Kingdom, the film is based on two children and their journey into adulthood. The childhood innocence portrayed in the film reflects how Anderson likes to use light-hearted themes but then have underlying tones of loss and sadness. For example, the child experiences the grief and loss of his parents. It has been recognised within the film and television industry that there is a certain narrative structure within all types of media. This was identified by theorist Scene Todorov, who concluded that narratives move forward in a chronological order, with a clear beginning, middle and end. He also stated that through the linear narrative structure, the characters go through some form of change, which is evident in the resolution of the film. The traditional story arc goes as follows. The narrative starts with an equilibrium, in which everything is as it should be and in an equal state between all characters. We usually see the happier and content side of the characters at this point. This is then combated by disequilibrium, which is the next step, where an action or character disrupts the previous state of equilibrium. The next narrative arc is the recognition of this change in narrative and how the characters are going to deal with it. The narrative then continues to a climax, with the final step being that the equilibrium is restored. This technique is used in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The equilibrium is shown through the first half of the first film, with the Shire almost being a metaphor of the happiness and peacefulness of the characters. It is also shown through how segregated they are from the rest of the Middle-earth. This disruption is then Frodo discovering the ring and Gandalf visiting him and telling him it must be destroyed. The realization is Frodo discovering the powers of the ring and the full force of what the Orc army and Sauron is capable of. The attempt to restore this disruption happens in Helm's Deep, where they attempt to battle the Orcs and take Sauron out of power, whilst Frodo and Sam try to destroy the ring. The film then returns to a state of equilibrium when the Fellowship are reunited and Sauron and the ring has been destroyed. Although this narrative structure is typical of most films, an unconventional and non-linear narrative can also be used. For example, with the film Requiem for a Dream, once the disequilibrium occurs, it decreasingly becomes worse instead of improving, resulting in an upsetting and almost ambiguous ending, leaving the viewer to think deeper about the film. Sometimes it is not a bad thing to steer away from the typical narrative, as it can make a film more interesting and compelling. This is the same with the television programme Black Mirror, where every episode ends in tragedy and with everything going wrong for the protagonist, meaning the traditional narrative hasn't been followed, and because the director uses this in every episode, the audience expects it. The mise en scène is an expression used to describe the placement of props, scenery, actors and costume in front of the camera. It is incredibly important to consider the composition of all these aspects because it creates the visual image and story for the audience. Directors also place certain aspects to evoke emotion and reaction, and it can be used for symbolic purposes. For example, in German expressionist film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, distorted shapes and claustrophobic scenery is used to enhance the horror aspect and scare the audience. The director I will be using for my stylistic challenge is Wes Anderson, who is very specific with the mise-en-scène that he uses. The look and feel behind Anderson's films originate from early European films, with similarities from other directors such as the energy from Truffaut's films and the dolly and tracking shots used by Buñuel. In Anderson's films, there is a lot more to the frame than you may think as an audience member, with the attention to detail being immaculate. In films such as Moonrise Kingdom, it is useful to look in the background of shots, where something else may be going on. Even if it is not relevant to the plot, it adds to the scene and the frame as a whole. The most recognisable aspect of Anderson's films is the symmetrical shots that he loves to compose. He organises the frame so specifically and consistently that the most important subject is always in the middle, diverting your focus to that specific point. It has been argued by other directors that a symmetrical shot is to be avoided, as it can feel quite stagey and unnatural. But Anderson has ignored this and instead created his own immediately identifiable style that undeniably works visually. Anderson is also known for his composition of overhead shots, which he uses to show the point of view of the character. This throws the audience into the film and establishes the character, adding in props to give small attention to detail about them. Wes Anderson takes costume and setting a step further in his films by including the characters' internal personal stories into their clothing and style. An example of this is in the Darjeeling Unlimited, where the three brothers often have clashing outfits and unnecessary headwear, such as the bandage around the protagonist's head, which add to the character but is also carefully matched with the rest of the scene. The colour palettes match their costumes and the setting, meaning the frame almost looks like a painting, with the vibrant colours and quirky costumes working in relation with each other.